Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? Today we're going to talk about something a bit more advanced from what you're usually used to seeing. The way my channel goes is that I will usually set you up with a base skill, and then from that base we will keep on adding skills to that base in order to create more complicated things. Most forms come from either a round thing or a cylinder, which is just a round thing with height realistically. And anything off of that can then become a bowl or a cup, and of course we go from a cup to a mug, which is just me giving you the ability to attach a handle to a cylinder, which is essentially a cup after you trim it in the first place. They're all kind of related and they all kind of stack. With that in mind, we come to this point here, which is throwing off of the hump. Throwing off of the hump was a skill created essentially by production potters to speed up the process of throwing. What we do is we get a larger amount of clay, usually probably about 3 times the size of this, to be honest with you. I've even seen people do 20 to 25 pounds at a time, and they will mass produce the same shape off of a hump of clay instead of throwing one shape, taking it off the wheel, putting it somewhere, and doing this over and over again. Doing this allows us to put our drying station next to us, which then allows us to keep throwing at a much faster rate, saving seconds, minutes, hours, and days at a time, especially when we're producing a larger body of work. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to throw off the hump. Now there's 3 main skills that you're going to need to throw off of the hump. The first one is that you have to know how to center pretty well. If you are still having trouble centering, I suggest that you see my previous video. I will link it down below for you, but I don't mean that you spend 5 minutes trying to center a piece of clay. You have to be able to center in underneath 1 minute. It is almost required of this skill. Otherwise, you're going to tire out your clay and have a lot of wrinkles and rankles inside of your clay as you throw, and it's not going to come out a good form. This is a speedy process. You cannot spend a lot of time messing with your clay while doing this. Secondly, you are not going to be using a bat. You're going to be taking your piece directly off of the hump of clay. This means that you have to at least have some knowledge or have had attempted to take your stuff off of the wheel without the usage of a bat. This means if you're using those bats, whether the big black ones or the little green ones, or these little blue ones that I have here, they're not really going to cut it because the amount of clay that you put on your wheel is going to be about 3 to 4 times the normal amount that you work with. It's a very large hump of clay that you're going to throw off of, which is why it gained the name hump throwing. The problem is that this amount of clay will destabilize this bat as you'll be putting a lot of pressure on the plastic, and it will move in tiny increments, which will make it more difficult to throw. I know the high majority of us who use bats don't usually throw past about 10 pounds without a more stable, larger, rounder bat. But if you are the kind of person who uses these types of bats, I would not try it. You should be doing this directly off of the wheel. Otherwise, you're going to reach an increment of clay that will destabilize the entire thing. Granted, I'm sure there's someone who could do it on a bat, but that person's probably so much of an expert by this point at hump throwing that, like, why are you here? And the third and final skill, the most mandatory one, is that you need to know how to cone up and down on the wheel. I will do a quick demo of that in this video if you don't know how to do that, although I have recently made a video and explained why potters such as myself cone up and down on the wheel. Long story short, it is essentially a continuation of wedging. All potters wedge in some form, whether you slam your clay down on a surface, you're wedging it with ram's head, with twist style, or you're coning up and down on the wheel. Either way, you do need to know how to cone up and down on the wheel because it will be the first half of this process. If you have all 3 of those skills underneath your belt, you can essentially throw off of the hump very easily. And with that being said, let me show you. The first thing you're going to do, as we do with all things that we throw on the wheel, is center your clay body. After you've centered your clay body, you want to cone up and down a little bit just to make sure that everything is homogeneous. You don't need to make this perfect, as technically speaking, you are not centering the entire thing. You will essentially be centering in the air, but you do want a smoother throwing experience, so I heavily suggest you cone up and down a couple times to make sure that everything is quite homogeneous. A little potter tip here, realistically it doesn't really matter how messed up this portion is, because you're going to be centering a little piece of your clay body at a time. And realistically speaking, every time you make a new piece off of the hump, you're going to be coning up and down like this. You'll be doing this, and taking a small section of it and centering it at the very apex of your cone. So the rest of your clay body can actually be fairly messed up, if I'm being honest with you, and it doesn't matter, because all that really matters is this small portion right here. See? Although that is going to bother me a lot, so we're gonna fix that right meow. Once you've coned up and down a few times and you have your clay exactly how you want it, you want to cone up and make a small point at the very top of your cone. This point right here is essentially what you're going to be working with. You're going to find a cutoff point based on the size of the pot that you want, and you're going to then center and open in the air. This is a bit difficult to do, but you're essentially doing what you would be doing on the wheel, but you're going to make a fictitious point at the top of your cone just so you know where to stop. Let's throw a small teacup just for example. So let's say the amount of clay that I usually work with for a teacup is about this much. I'm going to make a cutoff line right here, and I'm either going to open with my finger or my thumbs right up here, just like I would with a normal pot. And we're going to pull out and make the well, and you can see the clay body enlarging. And we're essentially pretending as if this is the bottom of the wheel head, while this is the clay that we're working with. Remember, this is our fictitious bottom, right here. After we've opened our donut, we're going to go to the bottom of that cutoff point and pull just like we would a normal pot off of the wheel itself. Once you're done throwing your pot, you're going to take your wire tool. A piece of string also suffices, but I generally just use my good old wire tool. Go down to that fictitious spot that you had made with your finger before and cut it as straight as you can. Once you've done this, as quick as you can, take the pot right off of the hump and put it on your hand as if you were putting it on a slab of wood to dry. And this is essentially your brand new hump thrown teacup. Once you're done making your singular shape, you're going to put a little more water on the top and bring the clay all the way from the bottom of the wheel all the way back up here, coning all the way back up. And once you've coned up, you are again going to choose a slice of clay, make sure you center it at the very top, make that fictitious bottom again, and you're going to throw this same shape or a different shape, it's up to you, one more time. So we're going to make the same teacup, we're going to dig in with our thumbs, we're going to pull the donut out. Remember, our fictitious bottom is right here. We're treating this as if it is the bottom of the wheel head. And then we're going to pull our clay and make another shape. And we have another teacup. Now I do want to remind you that I did not reset anything. I did not have to get a new piece of clay, I did not have to change bats, I did not have to clean up, I did not have to use any tools other than my wire tool to move the clay body. In an ideal situation, I would have my wooden board right here, I would throw my piece, cut it off, place it, throw my piece, cut it off, place it, and making every pot underneath about 30 seconds and most likely underneath a minute for the high majority of people who are fairly proficient at this skill. I'm trying to make a point to do this relatively slowly for the learning experience, but I do want you to look at the timer underneath, as I will not speed this video up, just so you can understand that I'm probably making these teacups in subpar 30 seconds, and for people who are experienced with this one advanced skill, it's probably usually underneath 20 seconds easy. We're going to do a couple more, and I'm also going to share a couple of major tricks with you that make this process a little faster and much easier for the average person. I meant to say potter, I didn't mean to say person, because saying average person makes me seem like I'm calling you average, but if you can pull this off, you are probably not the average person. Potter tip number 1, you are going to try different tools at some point, and I heavily suggest you stay away from pin tools and wooden tools when trying to cut off any type of piece. This is kind of a long learn thing for me. It took me a couple years to understand this, but I used to use my pin tool, so let's imagine this was a little thrown teacup, right? Let's just make one real quick off of the hump. Okay? Let's say that we have this little nasty, uneven thrown in 2 seconds, garbage teacup. For a very long time I was doing this. I was just taking my pin tool, and I would find it much easier to just do this and then transfer this over to wherever I was throwing. I don't want you to do this. For some strange reason, and I'm sure someone in the comments below can tell me, because I do not know the scientific reason behind it, this creates S-cracks, not all the time, but it heightens the chance that you will get S-cracks in your clay body. I don't know why, but ever since I switched over to a piece of string or a wire tool, that has been diminished almost 100%. I almost never, especially in the wintertime, get S-cracks from throwing off of the hump anymore. But at some point you're gonna lose your wire tool and you're gonna be like, oh, I don't care, why don't I just use one of these right here and do some of this? And this is not what you wanna do. The second potter tip, and this is a big one for me, is that you can use parts of your body as measurements for throwing off of the hump. I used to use a little ruler and then measure the inches that I wanted, and then measure the clay, and then divide that clay by how much clay I was using, and then tell myself, okay, I can afford, this many ounces or this many grams per XYZ per teacup in order to get the most accurate depiction of what I'm trying to make. So if I'm trying to make a bunch of teacups, I want them to be all relatively the same size. But you kind of have measurements right here if you do it correctly. So this might be a bit hard to explain, but this is what I do now. Whenever I'm coning upwards, I usually put my thumb here and I put my pinky right here. And this is the spot in which it is uncomfortable for me to go anymore. So I can't really go like this. I have to strain myself. For my right hand, it might be covered up by my fingers, but if you look at my left hand view, you can see that my pinky is at a very comfortable position unless I strain myself. So what I generally do for this technique is I decide, okay, I want my teacups to be this big. This is the amount of clay that I'm going to use. So generally speaking, whenever I throw off of the hump, I dig my pinky into the clay body like this, and this is what creates the cutoff floor for this piece of clay that I'm going to be using. I don't use measurements anymore. I just use my body. And now almost all of my teacups that I ever throw off of the hump are just cut off by my pinky right here. So now when I throw off the hump, I dig my pinky in, I put my thumb in, I will then pull my thumb out, and I've just dug in the well. After that, I will generally pull the cylinder with very light pressure. It takes less pressure to throw off the hump than anything else. From this point, I will throw one time, always stopping at that cutoff point. And we've just made our teacup in probably underneath 10 seconds. Keep in mind that what you just saw was me taking no measurements other than what is comfortable for my own hands and body. And the cutoff point is still here. So if I want this clay body to come off, I can just stop where my pinky is, cut it off, and here's our teacup. Another little potter tip here is that you want to use relatively soft clay. Do not leave your bag out expecting to do this technique easily if you have hard, recycled, bumps in your clay kind of clay. You want to do this with fairly fresh, soft clay. It can be done, but it is a little bit harder. The final potter tip that I have for you isn't really a tip, but it's more of an appreciation thing. In potter culture, those of us who throw off of the hump usually use this to make a couple of different things, whether that be cups, teacups. Very rarely do a lot of us make mugs this way. So far that I've seen, this is usually a teacup or bowl type thing, but in certain cultures, this is almost the exact way that they will make things like tea bowls. Because of the nature of throwing off of the hump, this is seen as a bit of a free-form throwing thing for certain things. So if you're making something like a tea bowl, you would want to be a little bit looser with your throwing technique. Of course, you have more stability if you're throwing directly off of the wheel, but if you're making something similar to a tea bowl, and you want it to look a bit more organic, you don't want it to look super straight and Walmart-like, you would want to try and throw it as loosely as possible while still keeping some form of balance. Right, and throwing off of the hump is an excellent technique for throwing a little bit more organic shapes. Things that generally come out a little bit more crooked, but crooked on purpose. Not so much that straight, clean type of non-organic feel that we get from overproduced, what I like to call Walmart work. A bit of potter culture here is that this is supposed to be a very free-form throwing thing. To learn everything and then kind of forget it all, but still keep those core practices in the wheelhouse. And this is one of those ways in which it is a little bit easier, a little bit of a trick, to throw a little bit more freeform. As you're throwing off of the hump, it's a bit more delicate of a process. But if you let that delicateness go, you can throw a bit more freeform, just like this. As a very quick TLDR before we go, I do want you to all remember that this is essentially an amalgamation of 3 separate skills. This is taking your stuff off of the wheel, especially without a bat, learning how to center relatively quickly, and then learning how to cone up and down. If you can combine all 3 of these skills, not using a bat to take your stuff off, centering essentially in the air, making a cutoff point, and making your work a little faster, you can essentially throw off the hump. It's actually a very easy technique, but you really need those 3 skills underneath your belt in order to pull this off. Thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. Hopefully this lesson was helpful to any of you who are at the stage who are ready for this type of thing. Good luck with your next throwing session. Remember to click all those YouTube buttons, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.
Give it one of those. Yeah! That's a T-bowl now. That's a T-bowl. Hold on. Let's get into it. Let's get into it here. No, the video's getting too long. We gotta go.